Hey, thanks, John. All right. This one I'm super excited about. These are like amazing people we've got today for each of these panels, but this one in particular, I'm like just fascinated to hear opinions from very different perspectives. First, we've got Liz Cohen, who most of you probably know. She's been prolifically publishing as of late and really helping us across the country understand what's happening. Liz is the policy director at FutureEd, based at Georgetown. With nearly 2 decades of experience in K-12 education, she has held roles at the District of Columbia Public Schools, the Office of Superintendent in DC, and various nonprofits, including the Urban Institute and 50CAN. She was a strategic data fellow also at Harvard Center for Education Policy Research. Amanda Bickerstaff she's the co-founder and CEO of AI for Education, with over 20 years of experience in the education sector, a former high school biology teacher, which we love, an ed tech executive. She's a consultant speaker and writer on AI and education. Amanda also leads lots of workshops. You should check them out in K-12 and higher ed, focusing on the ethical and equitable adoption of AI to help schools and teachers maximize their potential. And last, we've got Alex Arlen, 15-year veteran of the ed tech industry, having served as a product manager and learning engineer at prominent ed tech companies 2U, Scholastic, philanthropies like ZI, and startups Coursera, Skillshare, Credly, Newton. And he's currently a senior advisor at Cambria Learning, where he advises early stage ed tech companies. All right, folks, so we're ready to dive in? So Liz, I'm going to start with you. And you and I have had like a bunches of conversations recently. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, like, I know you've been traveling all over the United States and you've been like watching tutoring happening under all of these different designs. I'm just curious, like, where's your brain like right now regarding how AI might enhance like the personalization, like building that individualized learning pathway and if, in regards to the effectiveness of tutoring programs?
Uh, Thanks for having me. Great question. I mean, look, partly I think we don't know, right? But what I really think is that it's got to start with the behind the scenes stuff for a few reasons. I think I'm going to come off as the anti-AI person on the AI panel today, but a lot of my skepticism, just to frame it up front, is that I kind of think we get like one, maybe more than one, but really one chance to do this, to like put, AI in tutoring, let's say, in a way that can like really create long-term change. And if we screw up the chance, then it's going to be really hard to do anything we want to do down the road. So I'd rather like really hold back. And so what I think it's like, first of all, I mean, some of the things we're already seeing, right? Like the measuring of talk time and how that can be used to like help tutors think about how they're spending the time. I myself could probably use a talk meter on my own computer at all times because I'm an overtalker and I know that. I think that, the idea of like, if you're doing exit tickets or you're having your kids do Nearpod lessons, like in a virtual tutoring session, like how does that information filter to the teacher in a really usable way? I think in education in particular, that we've convinced everyone that data is super important, which is great. And I think 20 years ago when I started, like we were all still trying to get on the data train. The problem is that we now have sort of convinced people that all data are equally important and nobody knows what to do with the data they have. So what I would like to see is like what's the role for AI being like turning all of the massive amount of data that we have that teachers have into usable chunks so that it actually makes sense. And so if you get a formative assessment back, from a kid and it says like they need help on these 17 standards, like what exactly should you be doing next? Like that seems a place to really engage. And then again, on just these nuances, we've learned so much about how to do tutoring well, right? Like, I mean, Nate, you and I have talked about this a lot, as you said, like the reason I remain so bullish on tutoring is because everywhere I've gone, everybody likes it. When do you get something that everybody likes? But part of what they like about it is the relationship, right? So, like, I'm really not on the AI as the tutor. I think we're nowhere near that being any good anyway. Although Alex and Amanda are free to tell me that I'm wrong, and there's been like massive advancements that I don't yet know about. I think the relationship is the core. So the question is like, how does the technology serve to make that relationship richer, deeper, more authentic?
Yeah, that's awesome. Can we? I want to bring everyone back in to the view here. Mike, if you can do that. So I want to ask, because I'd really love to get Amanda's opinion on this. So, there's like this big question around the ethics, of course, but there's also just the general relationship component of AI and tutoring specifically. So, I oftentimes, when I'm kind of advocating for AI, I'm thinking, well, there's a lot of places that just don't have the resources, right? So maybe AI is better than nothing, right? Um, and so if you can create an individualized learning pathway using AI because you don't have any tutors, isn't that better than trying to figure it out, otherwise? So I'm just curious to kind of get your opinion on that and, reflecting on what Liz just said.
Absolutely. And I just want to, I always like to do this. I'm always annoying, but like I think that we need to be very specific with our language. Artificial intelligence has been in tutoring software for like a decade or longer as like deterministic. It helps you assign people, identify like correlations in data, like even the way that you communicate. So I want to like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about generative AI specifically, which is this ability of technology to be able to do like essentially start to connect with students potentially as a tutor through natural language and through novel applications. So let's say something like a Khanmigo is probably the one that we are most familiar with, which it was released by Khan Academy last March, really at the same time, the next day after GPT-4 was released. And what they've done is they've tried to create, what we call an intelligent tutor. And so intelligent tutoring is by far the largest kind of research base on how AI could help students, which is this idea that these tutors could actually support students to meet their zone of proximal development or the 2-6 sigma problem. But what we found, though, just to Liz's point, is that even Khan Academy will tell you that these tools at best are homework helpers. They do not have any pedagogical, like these tools are predictive tools, and they tend to be something that like you can fine tune, you can program, but like if a kid says I don't know twice, like Conmigo gets it like a little bit like sad for you and will give you the answer, which we know actually that some tutors do well as well, but those are not our high impact tutors. So to Liz's point, we are at this really initial stage where, and also to your point, Nate, that as a homework helper in places in which there are not these supports in place and with the right like kind of person, human in the loop that can come and take that homework help and then support those students actually to start applying, to start to understand what they really need to press them in the desirable difficulties of that productive struggle of learning. I think it can actually be helpful right now. And we actually do see that students, especially self-motivated, intrinsically motivated students that are accessing just plain old ChatGPT are actually really driving their own learning and starting to do really amazing things. So I would say we are super early in the terms of generative AI, right? But we are not new in the terms of trying to use artificial intelligence to actually improve our ability to meet more students in a better way with technology. That is not what this slide is about, though. But but I yeah, but I do think just to like Liz's point, like I think it's really, really important for us to think about the ethics. I don't know, Liz, if it's like one shot. I think we're gonna learn. I think that the time scale has been collapsed, and that makes it something that we have to make big decisions quickly, and these could be potentially very harmful. But I do think that there are really important things that we need to think about, because when you have a lot of data about students, you're going to be training these systems with a whole bunch of data about students, which can lead to some pretty negative things. So I think there's just this opportunity and risk profile. Like we at AI for Education, we're so much about balance. Like we're definitely in we're not an AI doomer or an AI pessimist or optimist. We're kind of we try to be a pragmatist in the room. There are many in this room right now with me, but I think that that's really where we like to lie in terms of what's happening right now versus what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 year horizon.
Yeah, and Alex, you and I had this discussion, which I thought was really interesting, which was like, there's this automatic thought that like everybody just thinks AI in education or AI tutor. They think robot walks in, is now the tutor, proxying the tutor, where AI has, at least right now, its application is much more powerful in those other like scaffolds that can come to just helping a human do tutoring. I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to distinguish between the different uses of AI, even generative AI, in the tutoring context. You know, as somebody who was a professional tutor for many years, I spent a decade as a tutor. I would say that, you know, one thing that I always wanted more of was clear data and actionable insights that I could actually use to remind me between sessions what was happening, to help analyze what the student was doing on and offline. The way I try to look at this is that, you know, AI, especially generative AI, is incredibly good at analyzing, you know, sort of infinitely large data sets, synthesizing them, and then responding. And it can take in or put out data in obviously plain English. That's sort of what's so new about it compared to other AI systems. That's really important because tutoring sessions are conducted in plain English or whatever language students are talking about, which means that you have data coming from sort of all sides. You know, as Liz mentioned, talk time in a tutoring session is absolutely data. Where a student is looking in a tutoring session is data. How much time goes between, you know, how much time between when people speak is data. And even between tutoring sessions, anything a student does on or offline can be used as learning data. So, you know, there's these vaults of data that are accessible to tutors and students, as well as tutoring companies, but that we've never had the capacity to be able to analyze and especially to output in clear ways that you can actually understand in an English sentence, not a very complicated chart. So what I'm really excited about AI is I think it can enhance all aspects of the tutoring system. So it can enhance students' ability to access tutors at any time. That's the sort of the Conmigo approach to access AI tutors. It can also improve students' ability to access human tutors or to get matched with human tutors. It can enhance tutors' ability to get data to enhance their practice, and it can enhance companies' ability to understand and analyze the outcomes of tutoring sessions and make sure they're working effectively. It's an enhancement that I think is going to work in all aspects of the tutoring ecosystem. And
Yeah.
you know, you mentioned Nate, personalized learning, and I think, you know, one thing that is very important to remember in the personalized learning conversation, as somebody who's had that term bouncing around in my professional life for a
Yeah, sure.
long time, tutoring is personalized learning. Tutoring is the original personalized learning. You know, we use it as a watchword for technology enhanced personalized learning, but tutoring is personalized learning, the sort of original style of personalized learning where you are relationship based, you have consistent communication and connections, and you actually understand somebody's, you know, what drives them, whether it's related to the homework or the subject they're doing right now or not. And that's really never been possible before. People have tried, but it's never really been possible before using tech. And I think we really are entering a phase where personalization, the kind of personalization we have in tutoring, can be enhanced enormously, even with a human tutoring session, but also can sort of start to break barriers. You can start to see personalization in many more contexts of the educational ecosystem than we've ever had before. We've all been promising that those in ed tech, we've been promising personalized learning for 10 years at least, and it's really never been a promise very well kept. And I think we're finally getting there with AI because it can truly bring huge amounts of insight in a actionable and a communicable way to the educational ecosystem. So I'm very bullish. I would say I'm an AI optimist in the maybe the only full optimist in this conversation. I know there's ethics issues. I know there's lots to be concerned about, but I really feel very strongly that AI is going to take tutoring to a absolutely new level globally in sort of all different contexts.
Liz, I want to go back to you because I know that you and I have talked a lot about like around the country, you know. I mean, we just like going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If they don't have shelter and food, they don't feel safe, they're not loved, they don't have a sense of self-esteem, how are they going to actualize? How are they actually going to be in a place where they can learn, right? So in your travels, like if you could respond a bit maybe to Alex's optimism with just like sort of the reality of what you've seen on the road, I think that would be really helpful.
So I okay, I'm I want to be optimistic. The reason I was saying the thing about like, do we only get one shot isn't, I mean, of course I agree, man, we're growing, but we're talking about teachers, like we're talking about teachers who still like 98% of teachers in this country, despite billions of dollars in high quality instructional materials, are still getting classroom materials from Google and Pinterest. So, and I don't say that with shade to teachers, like all due respect, teachers are doing the best job they can with the things that they understand how to use in front of them. What I'm concerned about is that if we say like, we're doing this thing now and we don't bring them along in like the right, smart way, then they're going to throw their hands up and just continue doing what they're already doing and won't be able to sort of ride this wave that we're predicting is one thing. Look, I think, but just to take a step back, Nate, to your question, like what I think is part of what's so exciting right now is, to be honest, is like, okay, so the silver lining to the like crummy disaster that was the emergency virtual learning of COVID is that we, as a result, drastically increased broadband access inside school buildings, and also to a certain extent within low-income communities at home, that school districts finally went one-to-one in the first time. So while, like, I wish we could go back and undo all of that, but if we can't, let's take like the one really clear win from that is that we now have the ability to more equitably and more quickly like bring technology solutions into schools because we put that infrastructure into place, with the caveat that we have to make sure we continue to invest in that infrastructure, and it's not completely solved. I've been in charter schools in the District of Columbia who have crummy Wi-Fi and it interferes with their virtual tutoring programs that they're running. So we have to continue working on that. But just to say, like, I think part of what's making this moment exciting is that we have that foundational investment was made in that, and we need to like continue working on that just as the base level. I think that, you know, I just think it depends. Like, I think that some places, I mean, almost everywhere I've been, most of the programs I've been in are using human tutors virtually, right? Which is totally awesome if you're in rural Louisiana or you're in West Texas, you're in Akron, Ohio, or you're in the District of Columbia, wherever you are. Like that part, the access to people, and partly why I care so much about the human part is like, I'm excited for what it might mean for our society, for our democracy, to have, you know, adults having meaningful relationship with kids in very different geographic settings, and like what that might, you know, the promise of what that means to just have that human interaction. But I worry that there's like a gap between even the great tutoring and then what's happening in instructional practice. Like, I think, you know, just because the tutoring is virtual, which is totally great, I don't know if that's changing anything else about practice throughout the school day. And I don't know whether we need to be concerned about, like, do we need to make a broader pitch for like the role of technology within the school day, so it's not just, oh, tutoring is this thing we do on the computer and then we do everything else over here. Like, is that going to pan out for tutoring in the long run? But at the same time, again, once you can, if you can get people over that hump of like, this kind of virtual tutoring is not what you experienced in 2020, it's totally different, it's small group, it's aligned to curriculum, it has a purpose and a strategy. And that's where I think, like, also just I would say with all the AI stuff is like, what I want is for schools and districts and even classroom teachers, like you got to have a strategy of like, here's where we're trying to go and here's how we think we're going to get there, and then you leverage AI to like get your strategy, you know, to happen. Yep. AI is not your strategy though, right? So I don't know, there's like a lot of different things.
Well, that really helps. Amanda, I'd love to turn to you because you mentioned something earlier that really resonated with me, which is, you know, at this point, organizations like yours, it's almost like it necessitates that you ride that fine line. You walk in between, you know, that walk the tightrope of like, I'm going to be an optimist, but I also know that like there's tons of data and privacy and security concerns. There are all these concerns around like all of the unknowns as to like how AI is going to operate, and right, like what data is being collected and how is it going to be used, and is there bias in the data for which these models will be built. So I'd love to just hear like your experience in the field and working in that context.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, we just, if you haven't seen our work before, we do really like a lot of work on the ground. So for example, I was in Iowa the last 2 days. I worked with 2 districts in Iowa, was in Colorado last week, working at a district near Fort Carson. And so we do like, I mean, I'm really in the weeds with people, everything from the kind of generative AI upskilling and getting people's heads wrapped around what these technologies are and aren't. And then also deeper work around like adoption, policy implementation. And it is really interesting. To Liz, your point, I think like there, you know, I kind of think about some of the tools out there right now that are very popular with teachers. Even Conmigo now has a free teacher version that feel like they're just teachers pay teachers, but now like you get a little bit more control and it's faster. And like that might, I mean, like we've seen that be a big part of like education for a while, and getting back, like, you know, like getting something maybe slightly more targeted and like this much time instead of this much time, that's still okay. It's like an interesting place in which we've lifted and shifted kind of the existing model of education into what generative AI can do. And I think that this is where like we really actually, us as an organization, we are tool agnostic. We believe very strongly that learning about like how to use these tools is actually like an empowering moment, not just for teachers, but for students. Like we talk a lot about the fact that like if you learn, if like creativity, a little bit of resilience and a little bit of prompting technique, you could do like fascinating stuff. So to like Liz and Alex's point, there are things you can do around like really targeting your content that's high quality specifically to the student interests, their, you know, like what they like to like learn about, what they're really struggling about in like fractions of seconds, right? And so that's really, really fascinating. And students themselves can be empowered to do the same thing because that tutor is a finite resource. But
Right.
generative AI, if you give the kids, it's really funny. I was very tired on Monday. I did 2 back-to-back districts, and I got to the end of the day, and I could not figure out the teach a man to fish idiom. But that idea, I might even try it again, is that like you actually can be very empowering to the student. That's not just the tutoring stops when you leave and that finite resource goes, and that kid probably doesn't have that space at home, and like, and that support at home. That you can actually have them continue to do that work on their own. And they could do it like at 2 a.m., which a lot of like high schoolers, like that's like their peak time. So I think that that's really the real opportunity here. But what I've seen is this a little bit of like falling asleep at the wheel that happens. If I can create 25 research guides specifically for the students that I'm teaching, why don't I give these bots like a whole bunch of information about those students, like their background, their language background, where they're from, maybe even their name. And you're like, oh, let's hold off a couple of reasons. Number one is data privacy is still important. Even cool, data privacy is still important. These tools train on your data. They train on student data. Let's be careful about not just how we use it, but teaching students to use it. The second thing is that bias is rampant. If you are ever in a training that's talking about ethics and AI and they do not bring up bias, you need to find a new trainer. Like it is impossible to unpick these systems from the bias that is implicit in them. So like humans are biased, the things we create are biased and actually amplify those biases. And what we can see is that, let's say that you were actually using the same kind of prompting techniques with 2 students, but one is a girl and one's a boy in STEM, you could actually see that the results of that could be very technical for the boy and very like, let's do some laundry for the girl. Like let's fix this, figure out how to make this work within this kind of domestic like frame. And that's been proven that these tools can use not just gender, age, location, background, ethnic background, language background to actually change the way in which they provide feedback and like kind of like support, because people tend to think, hey, you know, this isn't for them, or this is a way to encourage them. And then that is replicated in the things that we create that are then trained on for these models. And so we actually talk about in our first like 30 minutes, we actually go deep into bias, and we don't just show how bias can be very easy to see in image generators and others, but we actually talk to that level of detail that if you're writing a reference letter or supporting a student specifically with this technology, you got to be careful. If you're not looking for that bias, it's very easy to miss. So I would just say, as you're thinking about building out your systems of people that are on the call with us, thank you for being here with us. Like those are the kinds of things we need to think about. It's like, how do we balance these amazing opportunities to be like have that no longer a finite resource, and extend and augment and support both tutors and students. But then also, how do we balance like the knowledge that these tools are deeply flawed and will be deeply flawed because we're deeply flawed. And so like it's really about, I think for us, the goal is AI literacy building is required for anyone in and around using these systems, whether that's a student, a teacher, a tutor, a company. If you're not doing that work, like in the next year, I'll write you a strongly worded email with ChatGPT, suggest you should. But I think that that's really where I put a lot of our emphasis right now.
Yeah, and I'd like to turn it over to Alex, but really quick, I want to point out something. In the beginning of the pandemic, there was this kind of rush in to do something very blanketed and big. And a lot of that turned out to be like sort of this on-demand homework help thing, which was, what we realized in our studies and looking at, Carly Robinson did a wonderful RCT on this, is like there's not a lot of opt in to do it in the first place, which is one of the biggest problems. The other one was that really you can learn just about anything online that you need to learn. If you really want to engage online and like start to find answers to questions, there's probably a YouTube video that's pretty good that's going to help you out, right? Or whatever. And ChatGPT is getting better and better at that. But on-demand homework help continue to be this like, I think I'm doing this right. I really just need some reassurance that I'm doing it right. So I'm going to log in and like see if I'm doing it right. And I think that large language models are starting to be pretty good at proxying that, and you really don't need a human, right? But we also we really need people who are going to push others to be able to take that action in the first place. And so that was why like we really doubled down on high impact tutoring, because the prescriptive side of like having a consistent high quality tutor, if it could be in person, even like putting an emphasis there was really important. Alex, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yes, I think, the just building on what you're saying about the sort of tutoring ecosystem in the post-pandemic pre-Esser Cliff, window that we're in right now, which is really, really interesting. I think there's been a pretty distinct realization that, on-demand tutoring, where the emphasis is on the student to choose when to do a tutoring moment, biases against underserved students or those who don't have the wherewithal for any possible reason, and there are lots of reasons to sort of instigate that tutoring session. We've seen huge underuse and lots of canceled contracts around that. The other thing I think we've realized is that inconsistent relationship building has been a real problem. The idea of on-demand tutoring, where you can say, even human tutoring, right? On-demand human tutoring, where a student says, "I'm working on this problem. It's midnight. I would need a tutor right now." And you can connect to somebody who, is an expert in that topic. If that person isn't somebody who you have any understanding of or knowledge of, there's no trust there. There's no relationship building. And it loses a lot of the personalized benefits of tutoring in the first place. So I think we've come to a lot of important realizations about tutoring, best practices in this emergency moment. As Liz mentions, there's been some really big silver linings. There's a lot more one-to-one computer usage. There's a lot more broadband. And I mean, one thing I think I would say, just to hopefully add to this conversation, is we're talking a lot about the high level trends in tutoring, but I think it's worth thinking about. I like to think of this generative AI moment as pretty similar to sort of the advent of the internet in the first place. It's a metaphor I keep going back to. It is truly transformative in ways that we can't even begin to predict. And if you were to sort of flash back to the early 90s and say, how is the internet going to change tutoring? Right? Well, this is a moment when all tutoring was in person, right? That's how it worked. That's what a tutor meant. You sit in a room. And if you were to say in 20 years, there'd be hundreds of thousands of virtual tutoring sessions happening at all time, all around the world, in every different, context you can imagine, people would have been outraged. They would have said, "Oh, what are you talking about? If you're not in a room with somebody, how do you build a relationship? How would you connect with somebody over the internet? Like, it doesn't make any sense." And it's like, I really think that's the moment we're in for AI, where we're trying to envision something that is developing so quickly. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI all offer education-specific versions of their LLMs that are trying to be trained by educators. That is crazy. We are less than 2 years into generative AI, and they're already literally changing their models around to make tutoring better with the LLMs, because they realize this is such a powerful model. Whether it'll work or not, maybe it won't work yet. But man, that is a very fast move for something that is so young as a technology. it's sort of impossible personally for me to imagine a world in which AI will not be absolutely integrated into every aspect of tutoring within 10 years. The teachers pay teachers model has come up a couple times, and I think one very nascent company that I've been following, it's interesting, is this company called Novodia. And what they do, it's literally like teachers pay teachers, except that you can adapt anything to any language. To you can change the gender and race of anybody, you can change the format of anything you do. And the trick is that the core corpus of material is district approved, and then teachers can adapt it to their specific use cases. They can change it based on the makeup of their class. That feels like a direction that is very rich in terms of the personalization of tutoring. The idea of having a baseline of quality materials, and that materials can be resources or people, and then adapting them to the use case using really smart, real-time, very fast, very easy to use generative AI, which does both images, videos, and text. TeachFX is one that, Liz has mentioned, Talk Time. TeachFX is a company that has begun to basically take virtual classroom data and give reports to teachers about exactly how much each person spoke, how much they spoke, how much women, girls versus boys spoke in the classroom, how much, how many open-ended questions were asked, all sorts of things that we know to be best practices, but are almost impossible to integrate into education in real time. You can't, while you're in the middle of teaching a student, try to remember all the research about what you should be doing, but an AI can. It can analyze literally 50 years of education data and give you the exact thing that you should be doing right now. I maybe sound a little science fiction-y, but these things have happened so quickly.
Yeah.
And we've really only scratched the surface, and they're happening at the highest level. Of the frontier models of LLMs are adapting to education. That's really not something we should take for granted. They could be adapting to finance. They could be adapting to medicine or law. They're not. They're adapting to education. They're trying to make it work for schools because they know if it can work for schools, it can work for anyone. That, if it can meet the privacy standards, the bias standards, the pedagogical standards of students, then it will work in virtually any context for anyone. So I think that's why they're prioritizing it. And it's really an exciting moment for anybody working in education and the tutoring space in particular.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to transition now over to some questions from our audience because they're kind of coming in and we've got a little bit of time left. Before that, though, I do want to mention, like, one of the biggest moments for me was I like to just listen to podcasts when I'm driving, anytime I'm driving. So I'm just trying to learn from podcasts. But I've also started, instead of sometimes listening to podcasts, I've assigned a voice to ChatGPT, and I'll just have an interactive conversation because I want to learn something. Like I took a deep dive on quasi-experimental design and just wanted to kind of break down all of the ways you can vary, a QED and all this stuff. And it was just such a fascinating conversation. I had to double check it to make sure I was getting all the right information, and it ended up being pretty accurate. But it was neat to go from listening to a podcast to learn to interacting over Bluetooth in my car with this person that just could help me understand something. It was really cool. So Liz, I want to direct this question to you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let me get a paper and pencil since I'm our resident Luddite today, apparently.
So this is the audience question. How much do schools care about tutoring providers' data, though? In my experience, they care more about their data, their formative assessment, their grade books, their state tests. Would it not be better to work on syncing their data to tutoring providers for AI to analyze versus crafting another assessment that students don't care about and teachers as well to boot?
I mean, amen. I think that tutoring providers who are out there doing really smart, good work are mostly doing this. They're collecting data, but a lot of them are using whatever assessment, the school is already using. And it has to all be aligned and integrated. I think that schools may or may not care about the details of tutoring data, in terms of the talk time piece. That's probably more like the provider ensuring that they're providing a quality product, right? I do think that schools might care about is the tutoring, right? If these are the skills, okay, let me give a specific example. There's a charter school here in DC that is doing the TFA Ignite program, which is virtual tutoring with college students with their fifth graders. And they picked kids who are at the basically 20th percentile or lower on their fall assessment. These are all kids who are really missing foundational skills. And they decided what they wanted these 20 kids to do in their 10 weeks of high impact tutoring was to focus on the foundational skills from third and fourth grade curricula that they know that they missed because of virtual learning and COVID and all sorts of things. So you could imagine like a lot of obvious use cases for the data coming out of the tutoring that are going to be directly linked to what the school is trying to achieve. So I would say that like I think that the answer to the question is like, yes, schools care about their own data. We can have a broader conversation about, do schools care about the right data? And you know, I think everyone's trying to do the best they can. I also like actually, I mean, Alex, I was just like thinking while you were talking, this is off topic, sorry, Nate, but like, so like maybe kind of helpful framing to think about is like, it seems like maybe there's sort of like three categories. There might be another one. I don't know. There's three categories of like how we might think about like this generative AI stuff. One is the stuff we can't even imagine yet because it's like 1991 and like we're still recording songs like on a tape deck off the radio. Two is the stuff that exists now, but oh no, okay, so I've got four now. So the stuff we don't even know. The stuff that like we know we should know, but we have no way to readily capture it. That's probably that like interactive, like how could AI like reflect on classroom practice? Then there's the like stuff teachers don't like to do already, right? Which like I think there's some really interesting work happening in like essay grading and things like that, which is something that teachers like, it takes a huge amount of time. Okay. And then there's the like, what about the stuff that teachers want to make sure remains true to them? And like, how do we protect that? But then also, are there places where maybe AI plays a role? I don't know. So like, because I think if we start separating it into these sort of roles, it helps us think about the when and how.
For sure, for sure. All right, we're gonna pop up a poll really quick for everyone, just to let Liz and Amanda and Alex know you can't answer the poll because we don't want to bias it by having the experts answer. So you can just X out like I just did, but we'd love to get people's input on the poll. We have another question that's just come in, and I'm going to address this one to Amanda. So Amanda, you know, in your work, so through the lens of your work, the question is, how do you ensure that AI-driven tutoring programs are inclusive and equitable, especially for students from diverse backgrounds and with varying levels of access to tech, right? And I think it may have been, I don't know, I can't remember if it was Liz or Alex was talking about like, well, if you got no internet, right? Or, you know, you have like the oldest Chromebook book on earth, none of this stuff is going to work in the first place.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good news is that there are low to no bandwidth solutions that are being developed. I mean, you can start running, you know, these open source models locally on your computer, and we're going to start to see integration into our hardware pretty quickly in terms of like, you know, your Pixel phone, if you have a Pixel, already has some generative AI features that can let you manipulate photos really weirdly. So there you go. But in terms of inclusivity, we actually think that AI literacy, like driving AI literacy, is an equity question. We believe very, very strongly that we need to like very intentionally work with all communities, and that's in communities of all language backgrounds, of like complexity, socioeconomic status, because that's going to be very, very important. And actually, there is some research that's showing, there's a research that came out yesterday that showed that men are using generative AI more than women, but also that like people of color are using it more commonly than those that are white or Caucasian. And so there are some good signals. I mean, we have to like think about STEM and like who this is for. I mean, I think we have really, really loved the fact we do something called a promptathon, which is kind of a unique way to think about this. We bring students and teachers together to solve problems with generative AI. So we give them AI literacy in the morning, and then we say like, hey, you have 4 hours, do the most. Like, let's do something we've never done before. And what we find is that we've done this in really high complex areas, and it is unbelievable because the empowerment of being able to build with technology, just with language, is something that has never been possible before. You no longer need a degree. You no longer need 10 years of experience debugging and coding and like DevOps or whatever you're going to do. Like you can really do this. And so I think that that's really our opportunity again of equipping students really thoughtfully and intentionally that are going to need this the most. And I still think I guess I'm coming from a place of AI, you know, like literacy, like sorry, tutoring companies should be doing better by all students. That's just writ large. That is underscore. That is our community should be doing, our schools, our systems, but also let's equip these kids themselves to be empowered, to be learners in spaces in which they haven't had access before. The same way that you're in your car talking about quasi-experimental design, I don't know, a lot of kids are going to be doing that, but maybe that they're getting, we've had students that talk about struggling with understanding math and getting explained to them in terms of like a monkey and bananas instead of dollars, or like soccer fields. Like, you know, is this really unique place? And so I think that there's a two-part place here, is that we cannot also you know, no offense to anybody that's a builder in this room, but it's not just about you building, because you're going to have your own needs, your boards, your, you know, your revenue, like targets, and the things that the places in which you have to build, right? But like, what can we do on the other end to get students really equipped to be able to control their learning journey? So it just doesn't have to be high impact tutoring. It can be something that is more intentional and individual, and again, not a finite resource.
It's fascinating. So I want to pop I want to pop our results up here. So it's kind of fascinating to look at this, right, across the audience, that 35% said enhanced personalization of learning, and we have 27% improved efficacy. Real-time data and analytics was 24%, and the lowest was increased accessibility and equity. I think that's kind of fascinating and maybe telling in some ways. Like, you know, Liz, I'd love for you to reflect on this a little bit. Like, I think that there is a lot of optimism, right? But bottom line is, and you and I've had this discussion before, you know, if you've got a kid who's checked out, right? They we're kind of worried about whether they're going to have dinner tonight. They may have internet access at home because the community center is providing that for them, or something like that. You know, they may have access to ChatGPT for some reason or another. The question is, how do we build and how do we leverage potentially AI as a scaffolding tool for relationships, so that, you know, that kid, boy or girl, black or white, whatever, is sparked some intellectual curiosity?
Well, so first of all, let me just jump in. I think Amanda has to leave. And so on behalf of everyone, I'm just going to say thank you so much, Amanda. Excited to see what else you guys are doing. She has to go to another webinar. All AI.
So popular. Thank you, Amanda.
I'm going to go do that. But thank you guys so much. And everyone that's here, always happy to be a thought partner. Alex and Liz did a beautiful job. Nate and John, thank you so much. And thank you, Liz, for being so kind and calling that out. I hope everybody has a good day.
Thanks so much, Amanda.
I mean, my reaction to the poll is that, of course, the most people pick personalized tutoring because we all came here to talk about tutoring. And I've actually been reflecting on the fact that I haven't actually talked that much about tutoring. Like, I've been talking more broadly. And I want to say that, like, I think that, to me, some of that is because, again, one of the other reasons I'm actually so excited about tutoring isn't just because I think it's impactful for students and it's great for teachers and schools and all of the things that are true when we sort of follow the tenets of evidence-based high impact tutoring. Like, I am all in and totally sold, like, flag raised. But I also think that because the remarkable thing about this like tutoring movement that has occurred since COVID is that I think it really has both the potential, if not already the ability, to be the tester of what comes next for education. Because it is building on this foundation of technology, of internet access, of how do we rapidly scale, how do we take into account these nuances, how do we build data systems in a very new world of generative AI, new world in that like post-pandemic, who the heck knows what's happening next, right? All of those things. So I think as I'm reflecting just on this conversation today, like one of my takeaways, and like maybe that's related to the poll or it's not, it's just my thought right now, is that like I just think that there's like those of us who are in here to care deeply about tutoring, like tutoring isn't separate from all of the other really important work that there is and remains to be done in K-12 education. If anything, I think that the work we're doing to build high impact tutoring, to make it core to how kids experience school, like, is the future of K-12 education, because it allows us to rethink how we use time in the day, how we use staffing models, and yes, how we use technology and how we allow ourselves to be open to what's possible.
Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you, Alex. And of course, Amanda, who has had to depart to another webinar. You guys have been amazing people to talk to about this subject. I think we could probably talk for another 2 hours, but unfortunately, I have to move on to the next breakout session.